how the autistic spectrum is like hurling darts at a dartboard, and more in this Sunday's video. Hey everyone, welcome back to Autistic After 40. In the last video, we talked about how monotropism could be a useful explanation of the overall autistic experience. Today, we're going to dive into what the autism spectrum really is. You've heard of being on the spectrum, but what does that mean? You might have heard people talking about a line with low functioning on one end and high functioning on the other, but this really isn't accurate. High functioning and low functioning labels reduce the complexity of the whole autistic experience into a single dimension, a line from low all the way to high functioning. It's a bit like saying a computer's performance is all about CPU speed. Sure, that's great, it's important, but what about all the other stuff like memory, graphics? A linear spectrum does not capture the unique profile of strengths and challenges that every single autistic individual has. Imagine if we tried to describe everyone's personality using just like a single line. It sounds ridiculous, right? The same goes for autism. Each individual has a unique profile of strengths and challenges which a linear spectrum just cannot capture. So when someone says to you, but everyone's a little bit autistic, it's just infuriating, isn't it? This misunderstanding comes from this one-dimensional view. Even Hans Asperger quoted, "It seems that for success in science or art, a dash of autism is essential." Like the neurotype is some sort of sprinkling of sugar to add to a neurotypical person. Just add a little spoonful of autism. It's just like, what? Functioning labels carry a social stigma. Labelling someone as low functioning might lead to an underestimation of their abilities and potential, while calling someone high functioning, on the other hand, that might just completely overlook all of their struggles or their needs for support. Let's also talk about stigma. Giving someone a functioning label is kind of like judging a book by its cover. If we really can't get away from these functioning labels, then perhaps we should look at replacing them with support needs. Our hypothetical Alex has high support needs in a really busy and loud environment, but has lower support needs when he's on his own. Now, something like that would give a more nuanced understanding of individual needs. Sometimes an autistic person could be described as being high functioning when they're in a structured, familiar environment, but when they're taken into a new chaotic situation, it's likely that they'll face significant challenges. Imagine if we had a chart with a number of attributes on it. Now, everyone would score slightly differently, some higher in some areas and lower in others. Now, these values have context and are subject to change. So, for example, I can be high functioning. I think that I sound really clear on this YouTube video. Let me know. But I'm on my own and I'm talking into a camera. If I had to explain these concepts face to face, perhaps in a really busy environment, I'd probably really struggle, and I'd also trip over my words, and I might even end up feeling a bit stupid. In my opinion, I think this is where the next layer of labels comes from. We'll get to that later. Again, there's so much here. This topic is so big. It takes so long to unpack. When people see you as being high functioning, and especially when this leads to strong competence, like let's just say you have a special interest in computer science and you're really, really good at it. And that means you can be really competent in it. And people sort of look up to you and go, wow, you're great. You're very competent. But that is really in contrast to other things. So, for example, I really don't want to make lots of YouTube videos and go super, super public on like all my weaknesses or whatever. But if we talk about the contrast when you see the aspects of, my functioning that are low functioning, it can be really stark, basically. It's probably better to never call someone like me high functioning in the first place. This also affects how the diagnostic criteria is believed to work. For example, some GPs who may have little to no up-to-date training might think, you can't be autistic. You've got a job. You can't be autistic. You've got a family. How about this one? You can't be autistic because you're an extrovert and you like to socialize. Because these people are thinking one-dimensionally. Now, this colourful diagram by the artist Rebecca Burgess is the best example I've seen of this. Now, imagine our dartboard is our wheel. Each section represents a different autistic trait: language abilities, motor skills, perception, executive function, sensory sensitivity. For instance, this isn't an exhaustive list, by the way. You don't get to choose where your traits land. It is a little bit like throwing darts at a dartboard. Sometimes you hit the bullseye, but each throw, or in our case, each combination of throws or traits, is uniquely you. That's why people in the autistic community say, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Everybody's different. But before we get ahead of ourselves, autism is a disability. It's not just a personality difference. For example, you might excel in language, but really struggle with motor skills and coordination. My handwriting, for example, has always been really poor. Even when my parents and teachers arranged for lots of after-school tuition for me, teaching me how to hold a pen and how to write correctly, write between the lines and all that sort of stuff. This has never been something I've been able to do neatly. When I had to do my GCSEs, for example, as an undiagnosed autistic person, when you have a pen and paper, and that's how you're going to get your grades. I did reasonably well at school. I did quite well, actually. It's a massive disadvantage, right? On the other hand, my special interest in computing and years spent... Computer keyboard, I really like this one, by the way. IQ Unix F97 in Coral. Really like that keyboard. But because of years spent at a computer keyboard, it means I can type extremely quickly and accurately. I'm really clumsy and I bump into things a lot. It took me 5 goes to pass my driving test and over a year to learn how to scuba dive, but I'm actually excellent at those things now. And it just takes longer. Some people could also never be able to learn to do those things. And that's just one aspect of this part of the spectrum. It's a spectrum, it's not one-dimensional. As we explored earlier, your abilities will be positioned differently depending on the context. For example, your colour wheel might look different depending if you're on your own in a quiet room or if you're in a really loud and busy public place. As an autistic person, your support needs are very likely to be different depending on each situation. I feel extremely privileged that some of my autistic traits have been to my advantage and that I've been able to minimise and mitigate much of my low-functioning traits. I've been working mostly from home for the last 20 years, and I try to best limit the time that I have to spend in situations where I either need support or accommodations. Although, because I've been fortunate enough to do this, when I've told people I'm autistic, I've heard a few different responses. You don't look autistic though, Mike. Or, I have an autistic cousin and he's nothing like you. Or, you might be autistic, but you're not disabled though. Now, I've actually heard these things in the last 4 to 8 weeks. If you've said that to me and I've sent you this video to explain the autism spectrum, please don't be super offended. I didn't take it personally. And I think this is a way for people to say something complimentary, actually. It's hard not to take it badly. But if you think that if you think that all these people might know about the autism spectrum, or like from poor examples in media or culture, they could just be complimenting you, trying to say they don't think you're on the mega spicy autism end and more normal, maybe like them. And that's why I've made this week's video a general one about what the autism spectrum really is. And if it saves just one autistic person from being told you don't look autistic, then trust me, it has been worth it. So the next time someone talks about the autism spectrum as just a simple line, you'll know it's more like a complex diagram with multiple dimensions to consider. Thank you for watching my new YouTube channel, Autism After 40. You don't have to be over 40 to subscribe or comment or even like the video, though if you would, I'd appreciate it. It's kind of really my reflections on this new diagnosis, this new identification, I suppose you could call it.